La Mer is an unquestioned masterpiece, one of the greatest works that we have for orchestra. He wrote it by the sea. He said that he tended to take in impressions of nature and then compose from memory, from his memories of his experience in nature. So it does certainly have moments that mimic the sound of waves crashing, or wind on the water, or the cry of a gull, or the darting underneath the water of waterfowl, and those kinds of images. But he was really more interested in the mystery behind nature. He's sometimes referred to as a symbolist composer as opposed to an impressionist. It's a distinction that may or may not be useful, but the symbolist, I think the distinction is to talk about music as related to the energy, the life force, the nature behind the surface. And this is what interested in him. He said, you don't reveal the majesty of the forest simply by measuring the height of the trees. You reveal the animation behind it. And that's what he was interested in creating. So it's music for a very large orchestra, 2 harps, large brass section, 2 extra cornets who come in at the end to sort of represent Poseidon, the great water god. It's divided into 3 movements. The first movement describes the morning on the water from dawn, really begins almost with the slow increase of light through to noon. The second movement represents the play of the water, the waves and waves within the waves, and has an astonishing kind of rhythmic animation about it. And then the last movement is called it's the interplay or the dialogue between wind and waves. And throughout there are certain ideas that come back, changed every time they come back, but that appear in each of the 3 movements. And it's the only symphonic music of Debussy that you could really say ends in a positive, grand, affirmational, monumental kind of sound. The excitement of this music, and particularly the closing of the first movement and the last movement, is part of what it makes it such a satisfying work to perform and for audiences to enjoy. Oceana is Stella Sung's brainchild. Stella is a composer I've worked with for many years. We've performed a couple of her works already here in Akron, including her Rockwell Reflections, when the Norman Rockwell paintings came to the Akron Art Museum when they opened their new wing. Stella works in Orlando at the University of Central Florida's campus for the interaction between technology and art. She's in fact director of the program. And so she has developed a multi-platform experience, multimedia experience for the audience that I think will be thrilling and unlike anything we've done, and more ambitious in that respect than anything we've done. The work altogether has a social purpose. It is designed to bring public awareness to some serious issues confronting our oceans and Lake Erie and our waterways, in the form of pollution, in the form of noise pollution, which is something that people are much less aware of, and the threats that they present to marine life. Almost all marine animals use sound and hearing to navigate, to reproduce, to find food, to communicate, and that's because under a depth of greater than about 9 feet, you can't see underwater.
Right.
So all animals require this, and yet the noise caused by shipping lanes and underwater detonations for oil exploration, and just the general noise level, like being an extremely noisy bar that surrounds our urban areas, including here in Northeast Ohio, creates a really threatening environment for marine life. So Stella's written a piece that takes the orchestra and a recorded soundtrack of marine life and of man-made sounds, and takes us through this journey of sort of the natural, healthy acoustical environment to one in which deafening noise is the predominant experience, to, at the end, a vision of the coexistence of human created, generated sounds and animals. And it's a very moving experience. This will be the premiere of a new version of it that she's created. The first version we did in Boston this past summer, and people were quite overwhelmed by the experience and also by what they learned. They have the opportunity to learn through an app that she's created for smartphones. Everybody will have the app. If they want it, they will be able to download images and information about animals and the sounds, the calls, the cries, the songs of whales or dolphins or porpoises or whatever it may be on the phone. And there's a place during the piece where people can essentially play their adopted song, animal song, from their phone. We have also commissioned a film by a very talented filmmaker out of Seattle, Washington, called Annie Crawley. And she has created a visual seascape through her underwater filmmaking of these issues, and beautiful images of whales and troubling images of pollution in the oceans, and the suggestion of what happens when detonations, underwater detonations, that can cause deafness and that reverberate underwater for long periods of time. And this is a complicated subject, and one that increasingly scientists and ecologists are focused on. We're working with our friends at the Great Lakes Science Center, and they will be in our lobby and participating in the program to create an awareness of the issues that they are working on with children and with scientists and professionals, including the fact that this program will be an official event in the 50th anniversary of the burning of the Cuyahoga River, which is a committee that was established by the city of Cleveland. So we're proud to be part of that commemoration as well.
Work.
I've wanted to do Bernard Herrmann's Moby-Dick for a long time. It's a piece I've sort of had my eye on. I've looked for the right occasion to do it. It's a very large orchestra. It's an extensive, serious work by a really important American composer. A composer who had a great influence on later generations, especially people like John Williams, as film composers. So Bernard Herrmann was Alfred Hitchcock's #1 man. I mean, he wrote the score to Psycho and North by Northwest and so many others. Most Hitchcock films, in fact. And he wrote music for Taxi Driver and lots of other important American films. But he also wrote for the concert stage and also serious music for recording. This work is relatively early in his output and was created and recorded at the same time that he was preparing the orchestra for Orson Welles' War of the Worlds. So it was an incredible time for him, and it was an idea that he had suggested to his future wife that she write a novel about a young composer, maybe modeled on him, as he was courting her. And his suggestion was, have him be writing an opera on Moby-Dick. And then he turned to her and he said, you know, that's such a good idea. I think I actually want to do that. And so he began to write an opera, and it turned out not to be an opera. It turned out to be a symphonic work with voices. So we have two magnificent Northeast Ohio stars in the vocal world. Brian Johnson, who is our Ahab, and Timothy Culver, who is the narrator, Ishmael, and plays a couple of other roles of sailors on board the vessel. There are 11 different excerpts from Herman Melville's Moby-Dick, and they are really dramatically, cinematically set by Bernard Herrmann throughout. It's interesting. I didn't know this before I got into researching all of this, but Melville played a crucial role in raising awareness in the general public and also increasing to the scientific knowledge in the research community about whales. So he made a serious contribution to whaling, including, to our understanding of whales, including recognizing that even in that day, in the early to mid 19th century, predicting that they were imperiled, that they could face the same extinction, he said, that the buffalo or bison faced, and it was extraordinarily prescient. So there are beautiful passages here in Moby-Dick that are particularly relevant now. We're seeing real stress in some of these communities, especially the North Atlantic right whale has gotten a lot of publicity recently for the distress that it's under. And in my pre-concert talk, which I'll offer at 7, I'll read a couple of other excerpts of Moby-Dick that are just astonishing for their forward thinking about mankind's responsibility to protect our fellow species.